Don't let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. I thought that would be the most contentious chapter, because it has to do with disciplining children, which is, that's a touchy subject. But there's two elements to that rule, basically. One is, it's an injunction to clear-headed, pessimistic thinking, I would say. Because the first thing you have to do if you're going to abide by that rule is you have to admit that your children can do things that are dislikable. And everyone knows that, obviously. I mean, when you were a kid, there were kids you hated, right? It's like, so how has that changed? And your friends have kids. You don't like them. Some of them you don't like. And it's because they're horrible little monsters and their parents let them do, it's true. And their parents let them do all sorts of reprehensible things that are absolutely in no one's best interests. And they're kind of embarrassed about it, but in a sort of smiley way. And they won't do anything about it. Except then you don't invite them over anymore. And they wonder, none of my friends like me ever since I had kids. It's not that. It's your kids. Their kids, your kids that are the problem. It's not kids. And so you have to admit that kids can be dislikable. Well, that's hard to actually say that, because kids are, they're wonderful. It's like, well, they are, but we don't have to be stupidly naive about it. So then you have to admit, that's even worse, that your kids could be dislikable. That's a lot harder thing to swallow. And then you have to also admit that you're the sort of person that could dislike your own kids. And if you don't think that, then you're dangerous. You're dangerous if you don't know that. That's one thing you definitely learn as a clinical psychologist, is because half the people that you see come to see you because their parents brutalized them in every possible way, sometimes physically, sometimes sexually, more often mentally. I've had clients who, the parental rule was, wait till your kid does something good and then hit them. And maybe physically, that's not even so bad. I mean, it's bad, but that's not the best way to really go after someone if they're doing something good. You want to wait till they do something good, and then maybe you want to demean them, with a few cutting remarks over an hour, something like that, and really rub it in. Do that 200 or 300 times to your kid, and they'll be very, very careful about ever doing anything good around you again. And, then you win, right? Because, then you get to be martyr parent who has this terrible child that you have to lug around who's always ungrateful. You can whine to your relatives about it. And they can pat you on the back for being so compassionate and tolerant. It's just absolutely sickening. And it happens way more often than you think. And if you don't think that you can do that, if you don't think that you can do that, then you don't know anything about yourself or about other human beings. Because you bloody well can do that. And the probability that you've done some of that is virtually 100%. So, you need to know, if you're a parent, and just if you're a human being, that you are some type of monster. And you should be very careful with how you act. And part of that is you should be very careful with your children. I knew by the time I had kids, I kind of knew what I was like, although not as much as I might have. But I knew something about what I was like, and I thought, I'm not going to let my kids make me upset and angry. Because God only knows what will happen if they do that. And it isn't like an explosive outburst of temper or something like that. You hear now and then about a parent who's done something absolutely dreadful to their children, and you think, well, how could that happen? Just think about it for a while. If you actually want to know how something like that could happen, you just have to sit and think about it for about an hour. It's horrifying to put yourself in the place of that parent. People generally won't do it. But if you want to understand, you can understand. It's just that you don't want to. And no wonder. But I knew, that I was perfectly capable of taking revenge on anybody that crossed me, let's say. And that the best way to deal with that, apart from trying to improve my own character and listening to my wife when she's trying to, sort me out, was to not encourage my children to be horrible little monsters. Because they're little and fragile, and I'm way bigger and way meaner and way more malevolent. And so it's much better for them if they behave in a manner that elicits the positive element from me And it's not that hard to encourage children to do that. Like, if you have some sense and you notice your own irritation, I mean, you can't assume you're perfect, because you're not, and you're going to have arbitrary irritations, but that's partly why you have a partner to kind of keep you on the straight and narrow. But you do your children a great favor by not letting them act in a way that irritates you. But even more importantly, and this is where the rubber really hits the road, is what's your role as a parent? To promote the self-esteem of your children. It's like, no. No, that is not your role. That's boneheaded psychologists have told you that. Your role is to make your children welcome wherever they go. That's your role. Your role is to help your children maintain that gloss of innocence and attractiveness that's part and parcel of being a child, so that when they interact with other children, those children want to play with them. That means your child has to know how to play. It's super important that your child knows how to play with other kids, because other kids socialize your children. And if your child isn't socialized properly by the age of 4, so that other children want to play with him or her, they're done. You've failed, and you can't fix it. So it's really because what happens is the kids play with the other kids who can play, and their development takes off, and your kid who can't play gets left in the dust. And there's a huge literature on that. That's very, very depressing literature, like most truthful psychological literatures, and that's what it indicates. And so, well, it's the case. You know, if you're a social scientist, you know you've discovered something true if you hate it and it violates your political instincts. It's like, oh, look, a fact! Yeah. So, and then what you also want for your children, like we taught our kids how to behave in restaurants. We'd take them to restaurants when they were little, only for about 45 minutes when they were little, because you can't expect a kid to sit for too long. But, you know, the rule was, well, you can come to the restaurant, but you have to act like a civilized creature. And if you didn't, then we went and stood outside. You know, and even if it was winter. So I can remember my daughter, who's in the audience tonight, by the way, she'd be standing. She'd misbehave in the restaurant. Try and pull some stunt, because kids will do that. You take them to a new place, they'll pull some stunt they never try at home. It's because they know, and they think, what are you going to do if I do this here? It's like, I'm going to take you outside. We're going to stand where it's cold. So we'd stand there. She'd look at me and I'd look at her and say, how's this going for you? It's like, I'm cold. It's like, yeah, it's cold out here, eh? It's like, was it better in the restaurant? Yeah. Do you want to go back in the restaurant? Yeah. You want to act like a civilized human being? And we'll go back in the restaurant. It's like, yeah, okay. Back we go, you know. It was pretty straightforward, you know. So, and that worked. But what was so fun about that was, first of all, we got to go to restaurants, and so that made us not quite as bitter and horrible about being parents as we might have been. And the second was, you know, that other adults who didn't know the kids would respond to them really positively. So we'd take the kids to restaurants, and they'd all sit there and smile and eat and, you know, be civilized. And then other adults would come along and say, they'd pat them and say, you know, you kids really behaved well. And they'd actually smile at them. You know how if there's a kid at a restaurant causing all sorts of trouble, you kind of smile, but like a carnivorous vampire, that's sort of how you smile. But the kids would go out, and because they were behaving, you know, with a certain amount of propriety, then all the adults would show their good side, because adults actually like kids. You know, like you have to be a pretty dark person to not have a small child light a little light in your heart, you know. And so, as long as the child isn't doing everything in its power to extinguish that light, then, you know, you can get some positive responses, even from really rough people. And so the kids would go out to restaurants, and people would pat them and smile at them. And why wouldn't you want that for your kids? You want your kids, other kids like them. What a deal. Then other kids like them and invite them to play games, and they have a good life. And adults want to have them around and will be nice to them and teach them things. It's like, you're done. Parent, you're done, right? And you can do most of that by the time the kid's 4. So, but you have to come to terms with the fact that kids aren't innately good, and neither are you, that's for sure. And so you have to act like an intelligent person with some some apprehension of your own horror and the terrible things that you're capable of doing, and then regulate your household so that those things aren't necessary. And so that's really useful. So that's rule 5.